Welcome to A Way of God's Remembrance with Michael Hayes. This is presented by Awake to Love. I'm Lee here with Cindy. We are the volunteer Zoom hosts and so grateful that you are here. Our intention for this gathering was that Michael would be joined by Alicia Das. Alicia is not feeling great, so we are intending to have Alicia join next week. That will then be a 2-hour gathering. This gathering will be 1 hour. All your light and loving to Alicia is so welcomed. As a way of introduction, I will read Michael's words that help bring clarity to the focus and the format for these weekly gatherings. This is a weekly gathering for those seeking greater awareness of their true nature. There are many paths and approaches to higher consciousness and to greater awakening to who we truly are. The essence, the truth of all these paths is more about remembering who we are and have always been, rather than becoming something different or more than we have seen ourselves to be. A way of God's remembrance goes to the heart, to the intention of all the paths. This is what we will explore each week. Michael will share thoughts and awarenesses that come forward as relevant and purposeful for our time together, followed by questions and answers related to what he shares about. We will begin with an invocation of light to help support us all to be in collective alignment. We would love for one of you to lead us in the light invocation. If you are so inspired, please would you raise your Zoom hand and Michael will select you. Then for something new, we will have a recording to lead us in the 3 Anaihu chants. Michael, unmute now,
Denise,
please. Thank you.
Denise Lumiere.
Okay. Just got a hit. Dear Father, Mother God, we're so grateful in this moment to be with you, to be in your loving heart, with your loving hands surrounded, protected. And we ask for this light to push out any negativity or karma or anything in the way of our knowing the Christ and the love in our hearts. We're so truly blessed by all of this that is always present. And we experience this right now. Thank you again. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, all of our teachers, John Roger and John Morton, and travelers through the ages, and anybody else that people tune into for their highest good. God bless you.
One eye. Welcome everyone to A Way of God's Remembrance. We are grateful to have you with us and to experience your love and your light, contributing to the greater light field, this greater field of opportunity that comes present when we are gathered with this singular attention. The essence of A Way of God's Remembrance is the realization or the remembrance that it is ultimately God who's doing all, and that ultimately we are of God, not simply as tools of God's experience and expression, which we are, but ultimately one with God. And the purposes of our being and the purposes of God's expression have a synonymous nature. Everyone is here to learn about creation, about co-creating, and more than anything about the discernment to choose loving, even when all the experiences and all the information are pressing upon us to choose less than loving. If it was easy, we probably wouldn't have too many lives. My observation is that we have enormous numbers of lifetimes within this time and space adventure. And yet there's this underlying truth, this underlying condition that is entirely present in every instant, not every instance, not simply for us, but for all existence. And it's a consciousness that holds the keys of remembrance and serves the greater purpose of God, that for those souls, for those consciousnesses that are ready to free themselves from the Maya, as the Hindus would call it, or the dream, or the great sleep, that this level seems to seduce us into. This consciousness is ever present, offering the opportunity to come awake, to remember that we are with God and always have been. Many of the karmas that seem to control our fate are less about the events that we participate in, the things we do or don't do, the crimes, as the world would say it, or the blessings, as someone else might see them, that could be evaluated in different ways. These are very secondary to the core issue or the core thing that leads to our perpetual confinement, our ongoing lack of awareness of what really is going on. And these deeper karmas are karmas of identification, karmas of alignment inside of us to this world, where in partaking of the experience of it, we become somewhat aligned to its purpose and somewhat dependent upon its stories. And so we carve out a place for ourselves within it. Or at least that's what we think we do or appear to do. Ultimately, we'll find it's all been an illusion, and that we surrender to the truth of God and God's presence. And God then reaches to the consciousness and in a sense extracts us from the illusion. It undoes the fetters of identification of self and lets us be again Holy Spirit, or lets us more accurately know that we are Holy Spirit. This is the destiny, the inevitability for every being. God is love. And in essence, then, we are also love. And we're coming back to that truth, existence by existence. However, there can be an expedited return if we surrender to the truth and allow it to take place. It's not really forced upon us, but a call goes out from God to us that will activate within us an urging, a longing, a hunger to know once again this greater truth. Every being is destined for this. It is an inevitability. However, the opportunity is ever present. So I always like the idea of choosing this day to come into remembrance, to go into the allowance for God to do God's purpose and fulfill it in and through us, and then to take us beyond our own story into the divine truth, the divine story. Thank you for participating today. We're now going to go to take some questions, but I'm going to have Lee lay out a little bit of the guidelines for this sharing so it'll be clear for people. Thank you. Lee?
Thank you, Michael. Bless you, Michael. Guidelines for questions. Questions are about a way of God's remembrance and what Michael has shared. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your Zoom hand. You can find that by hovering near the bottom of your Zoom window. Click on the React button. A pop-up appears, and then choose Raise Hand. Please, if you'd like to ask a question, would you also turn on your video for full participation? If you are on a low bandwidth connection and cannot do that, so be it. Most important, since so many of us over so many years have had the blessing of Michael's assistance in helping us clear, this is not a time for that. Please don't ask questions of a personal nature and don't ask Michael for assistance in clearing. We ask that you look to the integrity of your intentions before asking a question of Michael. Thank you for your cooperation. Finally, the legal consent. By raising your hand and asking questions of Michael, you are giving full consent to Awake to Love to make the audio and video of this gathering, including your sharing, available as online archives for anyone to access. Please do not raise your hand and do not share unless you are in full agreement. Thank you. Michael, the hands are here.
Let's do Richard Powell.
Hey, Michael.
Hello, Richard.
You actually started talking about the question I've been holding for you for a few weeks. And it has to do with, I believe you, and again, I'm trying to remember what you said a while back about there really is nothing we can do in order to become aware and awake of our God consciousness. And you touched on that. I believe, tonight. So my question has to do about doing our spiritual exercises, becoming awake and aware to our process, and clearing karma. If that's something separate, I think I have a misunderstanding about going in, doing spiritual exercises to clear karma, and awakening to this God consciousness. Could you talk more about that?
Okay. So when we're talking about karma, John Roger likes to say that karma is spelled Stupid,
Right,
and relating to action. And in the subtler level of karma, it's the action of identifying, the action of framing a picture of reality, and then, in a sense, holding ourselves to a, a picture of reality, holding ourselves into the story that is concocted related to that reality. And so the idea that we can't do it is another way of saying there's the really coming into the God's remembrance, the God consciousness, is less about sort of working out the karmas of action, karmas of experience. And it's more about freeing ourselves from the illusion of self. And so
right,
so what we're really saying is the self, if I'm in the identification as a self, that self can't do more of the self to get to God, because the biggest key to coming into God consciousness is freeing yourself from the illusion of self.
right.
So that's why, um, as it was put to me so clearly by our teacher, my teacher anyway, John Roger,
Mm-hmm.
about, I'm looking back now, it's probably about 33, 34 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and the sharing I had with him and about this very thing. And he said, the less you do about it, the faster it will happen, which was so confusing to me at that
Right,
time of my life.
right.
But as time went on, I understood, oh, the less I do, which means the less I'm operating out of my story of individuality,
Yeah.
the faster it happens.
Mm.
But the more I bring it back to the great path of becoming, the great path of transformation, the great path of um, unfolding, all the different terms that we have looked at through different metaphysical paths for so long. The fundamental flaw in that is that it's always us trying to become something different, trying to become more,
Right,
trying to metamorphosis to into the divine. And yet we always are the divine. We're always divine. We're always God. There's nothing else we could ever really be. But we're in a delusion of being separate and different and individual. Now it serves a purpose of God for us to have entered into this delusion, but nonetheless, getting free of it is freeing ourselves of the illusion of self. Now, the tools you talked about, for example, spiritual exercises,
right,
you can frame your doing of your spiritual exercises to finish karma so that you can, in a sense, almost like climb a ladder up through these different dimensions in the astral and the causal and the mental and etheric and in the soul. And in a sense, those things that you're chanting, those tones, will in fact help precipitate that.
mm-hmm.
But if you understand that as an actual movement, like you're moving through space, well, it'll seem like you're moving through space because those dimensions are in the illusions of time and space.
Right,
But when you're really coming towards the God self or the Godhood, you're going to come into realization that all those dimensions were actually illusion as well.
wow,
They were a creation set forward by God so that an experience might take place. But they're not part of the permanence of God. They are an impermanent expression, almost like God painted on a canvas. And so, because most people's consciousness is still aligned to the time-space model, it's a really effective way to present to them this opportunity by seeing it as a way that they can bridge different dimensions of space and time. And there's a truth to it, but there's ultimately a pretend in it still. It's a strange thing that if you start going up through the different realms,
Mm-hmm.
not just simply to the astral plane, the causal plane, the mental plane, the etheric plane, into soul, and then the 27 levels above that, and then if you're granted that grace, into the things beyond that, there is reality beyond that. And but as you're in each one of them, in a sense, going through each of those levels, not just the astral level or the causal level, the mental or the etheric or the soul, but even in the dimensions above that, in a sense, what you're doing is you're knowing reality in such a way when you move to that next level that you freeing yourself from an illusion. Because you could look at that each of those dimensions has a level of differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
And that differentiation is ultimately illusion. Because when you get back into the totalness of God, there's no differentiation. And yet it serves God's purpose for this reality, this creation, to have an experience of differentiation. So, and be like if you're getting above the physical and you start to know, well, I'm not my body, and you get above the astral plane, you start to realize, well, I'm more than my imagination. I get above the causal realm, I start to know, wow, I'm more than feelings. I get above the mental, I start to realize I'm more than thoughts. Then I get
Mm-hmm.
above the etheric plane, I start to realize, well, I'm more than I. I'm more than this individuation. Now I start to realize I'm the soul. And see, when I realize I'm the soul, I have this realization of a oneness with God. But it is a oneness with God. And one, it's a knowing that you are, in a sense, part of God, that you're connected to God. And then in that awareness of the soul, and you start to progress as a soul up through the different levels above there, you start as a soul, you start to free yourself from the illusions connected to each of those dimensions. You get up far enough into there, you start getting up into those dimensions. At some point, you start to no longer know the differentiation between dimensions as a soul, but you start to know those differentiations as a spirit form, which means you're starting to be freed or undone of the soulic form.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, as you start to really move up there, you'll get to a point in those differentiated levels where to go higher, you cannot go as a soul. The
Oh,
soul
wow.
the soul is totally released, and you go as spirit.
Oh, wow.
And And then eventually, when you go above the 27 levels, you will go as the spirit. Now, you could be taken as a soul up there through grace, but you wouldn't bring it back because
Mm.
in the soulic form, it's not really prepared or equipped to bring back the fullness of what that is. Now, if you were taken up there through grace, and the traveler consciousness can certainly do that, you'll you, you'll come back with this wonderful, amazing sense of wow, but it'll be indistinct in terms of the whole thing, and you won't necessarily have the knowing of it. But when you really get there, like let's say you initiate up into that and you have that, what you'll have is you'll have a knowing of God, and you'll have the knowing you are God. You'll know you won't separate you from others because you'll realize everyone's God.
Right.
You realize there's only God doing all of this,
Right.
but it won't be just a concept. It won't be just an idea that you really believe. It'll be something you know, and you'll know it more than you know anything else. And this is the inevitable truth that every consciousness will experience again.
Mm.
And so I certainly do spiritual exercises and do all the things. See, when you're listening to sat tape, for example, well, it's not so much the information of the words. I remember
Yeah.
John Rogers saying to us, well, I could sit up here and say ham and eggs, ham and eggs, ham and eggs, and the same thing would happen. Because it was
Right.
never about the word. It was about the consciousness that was speaking. And I don't mean simply, it was almost like he was talking from that place of remembrance, which then has an activating quality to remembrance. And the tones, initiation tones, are keys of remembrance.
Mm.
They are keys of remembrance
Mm.
because they are incredibly aligned to that truth of what is. It's almost like that truth of what is can ultimately only be represented or reflected into in creation, in in this illusion of time and space. I mean, it can be there, but for us to connect to it, for us to cognate it, for us to know it, is very difficult in time and space. So these are like bridging tools, and they're very effective tools. I mean, I'm pretty relentless on how much I use them.
Yeah.
People would be kind of shocked how much I use those. They're my principal tool that I've used.
Yeah.
But into the really higher dimensions of it, it's different. You are awareness, and you
Mm-hmm.
come to know you are not this. You're not form. You're consciousness itself, and eventually, your consciousness interfaces and then surrenders to the truth of the greater consciousness. And eventually, you your journey stops from one of looking for God, and you realize you are God looking.
Mm.
And then you realize this whole experience has been you looking for God and God looking for you. And eventually there's this unification and then dissolution of the separate self. And yet to come back into this world and participate in those individuation tools, the soul and certain forms of spirit are still available for you in a sense to re-engage with, almost like, the astronaut's going to go out in outer space. They say, okay, so he puts on his suit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's multi-levels to the suit, which then allows him to interface in the realm of space. Or if it was deep sea diving, to put on one of those big suits so he could go into that other element.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we are consciousness. So the idea that there's nothing we can do, it's more like what we can always do is let go.
Yeah.
You see, that's kind of contrary to the idea of doing.
Right.
So I often refer to it as a divine undoing.
Mm.
So what we do is we surrender and we let go and let God and cooperate with the undoing that God is bringing forward. It's like if you conceptualized our beingness as like a knot of consciousness. And the Spirit of God then comes in and starts to undo the knot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting when in your awareness, if you're starting to move up through the subtle dimensions above the soul realm, the the movement from one to the next is almost like the letting go of a very subtle knot.
Mm.
I often have pictured it in my own process as the knot was like an NOT.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd realize the illusion of that knot and go, oh, it's like I see.
Mm.
And then it would be in the next. And it's very, very subtle. But the realness of it is greater than any realness we have here.
Yeah.
In that realness, there's a knowing. In this realness, there's a believing. And we can be convinced, And that's all great. But, like, we can be so convinced of the truth of Jesus is the Christ, like Peter saying, Lord, I will never betray you.
Right.
And because we really believe that's true. But under the conditions of this place and all the powers that can have a power over us because we're in the story of physicality and the story of individuation, they can sway that consciousness that we're using to have experience here. And that conscious can be swayed. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak.
Yeah.
And so, but it is that knowing that is the eternal truth of all that is, in a strange way, inviting us all into its totality. And as you know that, your life expression will automatically be an amplification of the opportunity for other consciousness to know that. Not because you try, not because of you do something spectacular or different, it's because it'll just it'll just be that when you're in that knowing, you automatically activate the possibility of that, where two or more are gathered in my
Hmm.
name, there I am.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps you, because a lot of times it can be confusing, like, well, if I can't do it. But you think about it, you have initiation tones that are the names of the powers that oversee each of those different levels.
Hmm.
And so they're like a passport through all of that, and they work very particularly for that. But then you start to get up there, and the passport, well, you sort of have a sort of generalized thing, um, a name of God that you can then use. But it's kind of like, wow, these other ones were very particular. That one is kind of like, well, God. So, but it's worth using and doing.
Yeah.
But the magic word is allowing. That is really the magic word. See, our existence here is filled with magnetism, and the magnetism of consciousness, and the magnetism of materiality,
Yeah.
and the magnetism of the storylines of all this.
Yeah.
And the spirit is non-magnetic, which
Hmm.
means it is not part of the story. And so what we're allowing is the non-magnetic to be not simply the truth, but to become our totality. Eventually, we will know that it is the totality. And the magnetic is an adaptation of the non-magnetic performed by God. Anyway, bless you, my friend.
I have a quick image of like a rocket trying to break through the atmosphere, and the higher it goes, it loses uh, the parts of itself, and then finally it's out of the gravitational pull.
Yeah, it's a
And
good one.
okay, got it. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I think to remember in all that is that atmosphere is trying to get out of us ultimately illusion.
Yeah,
When you really get out there, you're going to realize you've always been out there.
yeah.
Everything is. Bless you.
Thank you. Love you.
All right. Gary and Robin. I don't know which it is, Gary or Robin. Oh,
It's Gary. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Sorry, my video is still not working. So, okay. Well, it's actually shocking how much of my question you just answered in
Mm.
Richard's question, but maybe there'll be some aspects of it still that could be illuminated. Um, so I've been having a major focus of this God's remembrance, and within that, praying for it, assuming that it will happen imminently. It just seems to benefit me to be in that place of openness towards it.
Right.
Also knowing that I have to surrender and it's not me who does it. I've been thinking of it, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I've been thinking of it as preparing for death. That's how it shows up in my consciousness. And I know it's not physical death, but I have this kind of assumption that the me that's the ego me is not going to be the same me. And so is it like that? Does it happen in an instance, in a sense, or maybe an eternal instance? Do I hit a point of no return? What happens to the me that I've identified as me as I embrace the greater reality of God's remembrance?
Yeah. Well, you don't really embrace it. It embraces you. And as
Yeah.
it embraces you, you will know the untruth of the me, which we think of as the ego. The ego is our sense of separate existence, and you'll know you are not a separate existence. Hence, you'll know the untruth of the ego. And as you go into the truth of that and know that truth and live as that truth, the storyline that the ego promotes to try and keep us engaged in this world and keep us um, really enslaved to the ambitions and to the, well, let's just say the drama of this place, it just starts to fall away and you start to come into this neutrality. And the amazing is when you really come into that knowing and you come into that remembrance, you also will still have that ego as another thing you pick up to participate in this time-space game. Because it will be part of what will allow you to continue to interface with those who are still in that and to serve them. But you will know it's not you. You will know it's you, not you, more than you know. It's like if you have a cat, you'll know you're not the cat. Well, you'll know you're not the ego even more than you know you're not the cat. But the ego is relentless. And as long as we have physicality, it will attempt to re-engage us in the story as if it's the truth of what's going on. And it's hard not to get sucked in sometimes because this is a very, very clever place. Now, the big the thing is, oh, it'll be the ego death. And it's a popular way of saying it, but the ego is never alive. So it never really dies. It just never was. It's like a concoction that serves a purpose. And who concocts it? Well, we do. Why? Because our soul wants to play the game of time and space. But to really play the game, I've got to pretend I'm one of the characters. And so I get identified in space as the form. And then what happens to the form is identification into time. So to say the ego dies is kind of like saying something that was never really alive dies. It's almost like you say that rock died. And they go, you wasn't really alive. But the great death you're talking about is the death of the storyline. The
Yeah.
depth of the depth of it, the death of attachment. It's an undoing. But you don't have to have, let's say, a God conscious state before that death can happen. As you come conscious as the soul, there will be a kind of death that happens. What will really start happening for you is you will die to the world, which means your attachments to the storylines of your life will just they won't disappear. It's just it'll be neutralized, and that thing that you had to have suddenly you could take or leave. And it'll be remarkable how so many things in your life that you used to get so hung up on now you suddenly kind of look at. You may say, "Well, I still prefer it." Yeah, If you don't get it, I thought I'll have something else. And so it allows us to be more relaxed and more at peace with the process of living.
Yeah, and that's already happening. You talked about this fear that can keep people for many lifetimes from experiencing the God's remembrance, but at the
Right.
same time, um, the need to know that the intense longing for that becomes more important than the fear, and all that you've been saying in these seminars seems to be really helping me in make that far more important than the fear. That I have to know what that is. I have to have that. I have to be there. I have to have that.
Yeah. It's a strange picture they're giving to me. I'll give it to you because it may be able to help other people. It's almost like there will be this incredible fear that would take you, well, block you, is contrary to this other thing arising inside of you that becomes unbearable that you can't let go. So something that fear is saying, I must hold on, but this other thing arises inside you that says, I can't bear not letting go. And then it will be more powerful and you will let go.
Mhm.
And when you let go, you let God. It's strange because this is just kind of an inevitability for every consciousness to kind of go through this process. It's like this weird shift. I saw this very early when I was in MSA, but I didn't understand what I was seeing. But I understand there's like this momentum of becoming, and then within it, there was a real utilization of my ambition and my drive. I think John Roger talks about these different words, ambition, devotion, dedication, liberation. And I saw that there were elements of the makeup of the human that I was that were really propelling me, getting me to, do ridiculous amounts of essays and tapes and not just to do them, but do them with such a concentrated hunger. And then I was aware of a momentum shifting, and all of a sudden it was working differently. And I realized it's like I was reaching desperately for something, and I hit this place where suddenly I was no longer reaching and desperate, but something was pulling me.
Mhm.
And it was literally like, the image of Jesus they talked about, fishers of men. It was almost like something had caught me and was reeling me in. Well, that's how it really works. And so when we say it's when you are really caught and you've been hooked by the Lord, then that whole idea of the less you do about it, the faster it happens, saying, well, the less you thrash about trying to get off, the hook, the faster they can reel you in. But in our human consciousness, as we're in that earlier part of the progression of consciousness, our human longings and ambitions are useful to us. But in the part I'm talking about it, which is for a lot of the people in this call, the deeper call is the call of letting go and letting God. And that letting go and letting God is not a giving up of the tools, it's giving up of the storyline of becoming. This whole story of needing to become different, needing to become something more than I am, needing to transform into, I was a caterpillar, and now I better transform into a butterfly. Those metaphors are really powerful for us as motivators, but the reality is, the truth is, you were always a butterfly pretending to be that had surrendered into the dream of caterpillarness. So if we look at it like that, it's already done, and you're just catching on to the truth of it.
Hmm.
All right, Gary, bless you.
Thank you so much.
It's interesting for me to talk about that because I go so into that I'm talking about. Sometimes I have to kind of work to refocus enough into this to do this. But we will do that. Let me just see. I thought there was a couple of hands. I only see one now. All right, Linda. Cannot hear you. Your
Okay,
volume's
can you
low.
hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. My question is about loving. It's what you started this call with. And as you can see, I'm in the recovery room of the hospital. I just had a hip replacement. And
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, thank you. And I've been calling people and getting calls from people that have been not part of my life by choice. And something happened where I just thought the loving is more important. The loving is more important than who was right, who was wrong, who did what, and just to love everybody. And so whatever you can share about loving and how to move more into that every day, like, even the people here at the hospital, they've been so wonderful.
Yeah,
And
you want to let the loving move through you. See,
right.
you are still trying to move into the loving. So you're still in the path of becoming. I'm trying to become more loving. I'm trying to make my life be filled with more loving. I'm suggesting to you that the loving is entirely present because God is and God is love. So you want to surrender to that love and let that love move through your form and move through the story of your life and move through all aspects of your living. You let
Mhm.
go and let God love itself through you. Think of
Right.
God as the ultimate lover, making love to all aspects of itself.
Mhm.
The storylines that we let get in the way of that loving are just indicative of how we're holding on to the definition of ourself as this. And is that a bad thing? No, it's obviously a great thing because God set it up for us to all do that. However, it can get kind of old. It can get kind of familiar and it can get kind of, oh, in a strange way, no longer giving us the reward of discovery or the reward of learning. And so I call you forward in your own consciousness to realize that your true nature is loving. And part of the reason you set up the dynamic of your storyline of your life to deal with these loving and unloving and all those different things was to force you up against the positional attachment that has been a karmic storyline of yours for many lives, where I love you if I don't love you if. And so love was conditional, connected to what was going on outside of the consciousness. And that's the game the world plays upon all of us to hold us in that. Now, I hear you saying the important thing is the loving regardless of the story. And I go, all right, that's really what it's about. When you get enough into the loving, into the source of that loving, you realize to God, to the spirit, these stories are non-existent. It's almost like you're enough into that loving. It's almost it's like looking at all the storylines as like wisp of vapor. There's an awareness in God that that's going on, but it is so unsubstantial and it is so impermanent that God has awareness of it. I won't say God totally ignores it, but God doesn't attend to it. God allows it because God knows, like a fog is lifting, God knows the sunshine's going to come through and there'll be no fog.
Mhm.
So it doesn't get related to from spirit the way we who are in the illusion of self and the illusion of physicality would do that. You've got a lot of opportunity to come into what we call the divine unknowing, which is where you free yourself from the whole part of consciousness playing the game of right and wrong and good and bad and fair and unfair, and just realize in that part of consciousness we were powerless. So we realize all the pretense I have of knowing about all that is just pretense. Because no matter what case I could make for the rightness of a thing or the wrongness of a thing, from a higher perception, seeing the karma that put it in play, I realize, oh, well, these are all the reasons to be seeing that I'm being victimized. But if I look at the whole karma, well, I'm not being victimized because I did this. The reality is, in the end, nobody's being victimized. It's just people playing the game of victim and victimizer. But the reality is we're a consciousness beyond all that. Since that's the reality, since that's the truth, why not let the whole thing go in terms of being aligned to it and being controlled by it? Which you have a lot of karma where you've let yourself be controlled by it. And so you've been in a circumstance where it's kind of been rubbed. It's like getting your nose rubbed in it all over the place to eventually realize this isn't for me.
One of the things I noticed on some of these calls is when I felt myself getting hooked back into the stories, I had to go. I got to go now. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah.
I just had to disconnect from them.
Yeah. And you're going to realize that that same process that you do with the other person is which a process you will do within your own consciousness, particularly with your thinking and somewhat your feeling, where you just catch yourself and go, what's the old thing? Past, next. These are just versions of things we do to disconnect our focus from different storylines. And there are a lot of powers within this creation that will continuously attempt to cajole us into re-engaging with storylines.
Right.
And
Right.
every time we free ourselves from a storyline, in a sense, that's freeing ourselves from a karmic entrapment.
Right. Yeah, I had that a few times today. So,
Yeah,
but
no,
also,
you're doing it right. You just continue the process. So more
okay.
about the loving is being in the allowing. It's there for
Okay.
you. And first you'll become aware of it, be receptive to it, and eventually you will become not aware of it, but you will become aware you are it, and you will become it is all, and therefore you are all, and you have God consciousness.
Okay.
That's an inevitability. Along the way, we work the process as the process works us.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Bless you.
God bless you. I love you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. I think we're getting close, and I don't see any more hands. So what shall we do? What shall we do? Let's let's open to receive and allow God, the Spirit, the mystical traveler consciousness to meditate us awake. It is always doing this and offering us this option or opportunity to become conscious of its truth, to become conscious that it is living us, that it is loving us, that it is carrying us, that it is the foundation of all existence, that it is the ebbing and the flowing of all that is. Let us surrender to this truth. Give over to it, allowing it to take us into its own totality. Bring us into peace, bring us into stillness, bring us into the silence, even beyond the miraculous nature of the sound current. There is the silence. In this, we are remembered to truth itself. The God that is all, creates all, lives all, sustains all, envelops us, and fills us, releasing us from distinctions and distortions. That we are in the oneness, the truth of all that is. And there is nothing to do or nowhere to go. And it is this allowance of total truth that activates remembrance, of all that is, of that which is, of the one that is. Nowhere and everywhere. It is what is. Everyone is everything. Everyone is God, is spirit. And hence the blessings already are. Amen. Berish Bashan. Since no one has to get and drive a car, I believe, at least not right away. And we'll leave you in this awareness as we come to the end of our Zoom gathering. Many thanks to all of you for participating. We will return next week, Wednesday at 6:30. Plan is to have Alicia with us as well. And for our gathering to last for 2 hours instead of 1. We'll see how that all works out. There was also a request from several people for a donation feature, so we put one into the forms there. But of course, that's totally optional, not required. For those who wish that, it's been provided. And to each of you, I invite you to open your consciousness to experience this deeper truth in greater and greater ways, in greater availability. Let it become your normal, your truth. The essence of your existence. And we do give thanks for this opportunity to commune, Lord. Thank you. And so be it. And bless you all. Thank you for participating. We'll be back next week. My love to each of you.
Thank you, Michael. God bless you.
Bless you all.
Thank you for this beautiful
God
space.
bless
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Berush
Bless you.
Bashan.
Thank you, Michael. Bless you.
Thank you. Good night. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
Bye.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.